Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Shut up. Om. Om. Good. Sorry. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Wrong one. That one. Good. Nice to see you all this morning. And also welcome to the many viewers watching this class online. We'll continue today our study of Chapter 9 of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll begin with recitation, beginning with verse 17. And as always, as I'm chanting, please read the translation and then repeat after me. Pitahamasya jagato, pitahamasya jagato, mata dhata pitamaha, mata dhata pitamaha, vedyam pavitram honkara, vedyam pavitram honkara, riksamaya jurhevacha, riksamaya jurhevacha, Gatir Bharta Prabhu Sakshi, Gatir Bharta Prabhu Sakshi, Nivasa Sharanam Suhrata, Nivasa Sharanam Su, Prabhava Pralayasthanam, Prabhava Pralayasthanam, Nidhanam Bijam Avyayam, Nidhanam Bij. Sorry. Tapam yahamaham varsham, tapam yahamaham varsham, nigraham yutsrajami cha, nigraham yutsrajami cha, amritan chaiva mrityuscha, amritan chaiva mrityuscha, sarasachaham arjuna, sarasachaham arjuna. We have to change of meter here. Trividyamam soma paputa papa, Trividyamam soma paputa papa, Yajñarishtva swargatim prartayante, Yajñarishtva swargatim prartayante, Te punyamasadya surendra lokam, Te punyamasadya surendra lokam, Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan, Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan, Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam, Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam, Kshine punye martya lokam vishanti, Kshine punye martya. Evam trayi dharma manuprapanha, Evam trayi dharmamanuprapanna gatagatam kama kama labhante gatagatam kama kama labhante ananyashchintayanto mam ananyashchintayanto mam ye jana paryupasate ye jana paryupasate tesham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham yogakshemam vahamyaham. Very good. Sorry. We continue our study, chapter 9. Remember the title, Jnana Vijnana, knowledge, knower of the lower aspect of Ishvara, Saguna Brahman, knowledge of the higher aspect, Nirguna Brahman. And the focus is on knowledge. You remember my comment that the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are focused on bhakti. That's kind of the overall theme from chapters 7 through 12. So then you might wonder, well, this chapter is not specifically on bhakti, it's on knowledge. Not knowledge in general, though, knowledge of Ishvara, knowledge of Saguna Brahman, knowledge of Nirguna Brahman. And that knowledge is crucial because bhakti means worship, devotion. How can you pray to someone or something that's totally unknown to you? It doesn't make sense at all. I've shared with you long ago this joke. This is a joke told by the followers of the Unitarian Church. Unitarian Church is not really Christian. It's kind of, they honor and respect all religious traditions, but they often take a rather agnostic point of view. So their joke, and it's their joke, I'm not picking on them, they themselves tell this joke, which is, how does a Unitarian begin her prayers? She begins, to whom it may concern. Now, that illustrates the problem of bhakti in the absence of knowledge. Your bhakti is sincere only to the extent that you know who and what Ishvara truly is. Therefore, the focus of this whole chapter is on knowledge of Ishvara. Okay. Before we pick up the thread, a couple of good questions. So in our prior discussion, can we turn the board light on? I was talking about Saguna Brahman and said that Saguna Brahman is formless. And Saguna Brahman, remember, is our technical Vedanta term for Ishvara, creator, sustainer, destroyer. And just to remember the larger context, we'll turn to the board. You'll remember that Saguna Brahman up on top is Ishvara because being creator, sustainer, and destroyer are gunas, qualities, attributes, as opposed to Nirguna Brahman on the bottom, who is neither a creator, a destroyer, or a sustainer. Nirguna Brahman is the one unchanging reality. From the standpoint of Nirguna Brahman, there is only Nirguna Brahman. Like from the standpoint of clay, there is only clay. We can change our perspective and see a pot, but from that perspective, we say then that clay is the underlying, watch this. From the standpoint of clay, there's only clay. From the standpoint of pot, clay is the underlying, clay is that which gave rise to the pot. Clay is that which sustains the pot, and clay is that unto which this pot will eventually return. From the standpoint of pot, that's our orientation of Saguna Brahman Brahman with the qualities of being creator, sustainer, destroyer. So I mentioned that Saguna Brahman is formless, and the question is, I thought Nirguna Brahman is formless. Nirguna Brahman is formless. Saguna Brahman is also formless. Either formless or all forms. Clay itself is, now you know this is a metaphor, so clay itself is relatively formless. I know it comes in a lump or something, but in terms of our metaphor, clay doesn't have a particular form. Suppose clay existed only as 1-inch cubes. Like when you make this paneer. So imagine that clay was like paneer. It existed as these 1-inch cubes. If clay was 1-inch cubes, could you make this pot out of clay? No. Because clay is relatively formless, it can give rise to an infinite number of forms. You get it now, right? Because Saguna Brahman is formless, Saguna Brahman gives rise to everything and anything that exists, including you and me and the room in which we're sitting. So Saguna Brahman is Saguna because it has the attributes of being creator, destroyer, sustainer, and many others, but that Saguna Brahman is fundamentally formless. Our topic today, though, is we're going to worship that one formless Saguna Brahman, that formless, oh, I forgot to go back here, sorry. Here, I was showing the pot, I didn't show the viewers of the video, the pot. So we were talking about this pot, sorry. So today, by the way, we're going to be talking about how to worship that formless Saguna Brahman, that formless Ishvara. That topic comes today. Last question is, back in verse 17, Sri Krishna mentioned 3 Vedas. 17, right, at the bottom. Rik, Sama, Yajur. What happened to Atharva Veda? There are 2 ways of explaining why he mentions only 3 of 4. One is that historically, Rig, Sama, and Yajur Veda came first. Sama Veda historically came at a later time. The content of the Atharva Veda is also different. But there's a more pragmatic reason, and that is Atharva Veda didn't fit on that line. You only get 8 syllables per line to work on. So for either reason or both, Atharva Veda wasn't mentioned. It's very common. The expression 3 Vedas, Trividyam, in fact we're going to see in today's class, is actually quite a common expression. The 3 Vedas are the source of all the main rituals that are performed. The Atharva Veda is not the source of those main rituals. So it becomes in a different category. Okay, enough. Let's pick up the thread and continue. Talking about that Saguna Brahman, the formless Ishvara, whom we worship. Gatir Bharata Prabhu Sakshi, Gatir Bharata Prabhu Sakshi, Nivasa Sharanam Suhrata, Nivasa Sharanam Suhrata, Prabhava Pralayasthanam, Prabhava Pralayasthanam, Nidhanam Bijam Avyayam, Nidhanam Bijam Avyayam. Here I'll just remind you of what we discussed in a prior class, to return to my Guru's words. Since we understand Ishvara as Saguna Brahman, Saguna Brahman then is the reality because of which everything exists. We've had this discussion at great length. Since Ishvara or Saguna Brahman is the reality because of which everything exists, the only reality because of which everything exists, then we can shift our perspective from saying God is one to saying, in my Guru's words, there is only God. Not one God, but only God is the highest vision of the ancient rishis. And that's what we're seeing here. So Ishvara is everything. Everything means Ishvara is the gatihi, the goal we seek in life. Ishvara is the bharta, the supporter, the sustainer of all that exists. Ishvara is Prabhu. Prabhu is master. Master in the sense that we've used the term before, karma paladata, the one who gives you the results of the deeds you've committed, the one who gives you good results, desirable results for your good deeds, the one who gives you undesirable results for your harmful deeds. That is Ishvara, the one who metaphorically makes the planet stay in orbit around the sun. Metaphorically. How? Ishvara is the source of the laws of nature. Just as everything that exists is a manifestation of Ishvara, the laws of nature, not just physical nature, but the intelligence. Put it like this, both the material and the intelligence of the universe. Intelligence of the universe means the laws of nature. Both the material underlying essence because of which the universe exists is Ishvara, and the intelligence that holds the universe together is also Ishvara, both the material and intelligence. The technical words we use in Vedanta, they were up on the board long ago. We said Ishvara is the upadana karana, the material cause, and the nimitta karana, the intelligence. Okay. Ishvara is also sakshi. Sakshi means witness. And that witness is a reference to the consciousness within you, the one who looks out through your two eyes, the one who hears whatever comes into your ears, the one who smells whatever comes into your nostrils, tastes whatever comes into your mouth, the one who knows what you're thinking right now, the one who knows your emotions, that inner observer, a wareful witness is Sakshi. And here Sri Krishna says, I am that Sakshi. We talk about the inner divinity. Ishvara is the reality because of which everything exists, including your own consciousness. Also, nivasaha. Nivasa, abode. Abode is where you live. Right now we are all in this room. This room is in space. Space is in Ishvara. Not location-wise, but this room is in, we are in this room. This room is in space, and space is in Ishvara in a sense that space was made manifest by Ishvara. Space exists supported by Ishvara. At the end of time, space itself will collapse and return to Ishvara. So in that sense, Ishvara is the nivasa, the abode, the one in which we live. Ishvara is also sharanam and suhrit. Nice words. Sharanam, refuge. Suhrit literally means good heart. Good-hearted one means friend. The one who, and both of these words refer to the one from whom we can receive solace, love, support, care at times of difficulty, when we're really suffering, sad, etc. We can find peace and comfort by quieting our minds and appreciating Ishvara's presence within. It's surprisingly easy. Just to make this a little bit more concrete, suppose you're really upset. If you knew how to meditate, even though upset, you can make your mind fairly quiet. It's not that hard, but take some practice. So even if you're upset and you make your mind quiet, do you still feel upset? Gone. You feel peace. That peace is because of that inner divinity. By getting rid of the agitation of your mind, what remains is Ishvara's divine presence. We experience that as inner peace. Ishvara, third line, is the prabhavaha, origin, sthanam, sustenance, and pralayaha, dissolution. Prabhavaha, Brahma, God as creator. Sthanam, Vishnu, God as sustainer. Pralaya, Shiva, Maheshwara, God as, and I've made this comment several times, we use the word destroyer and it doesn't give the right sense, right? It's not that we think of destroying as a very violent act of breaking something into pieces, but we understand everything is cyclic. Like a tree is born of a seed. That tree lives its life. Even trees have a finite life, right? 100 years, 200 years, some longer than that, but even that tree dies. So that cyclic nature of creation itself is referred to here. So when the universe comes to its natural end, it returns to Ishvara, the God unto whom the universe returns at the end of time is called Shiva in the scriptures, and that's the one we loosely call destroyer, but you can see how the term destroyer doesn't really capture the intent. Okay. Also, that Ishvara, Saguna Brahman, Sri Krishna says, I am that Ishvara, I am that Saguna Brahman. So here that Ishvara is in the fourth line, Nidhanam. Now my translation says end, but when I looked at Madhusudana Saraswati's translation, he gives a different interpretation. It can mean end. It can also mean like a storehouse. Maybe a more common word related, etymologically related, is nidhi. Nidhi means a treasure, a store of treasure, a store of that which is valuable. So nidhanam here, I would by the way, I keep commenting on the commentator the commentator's mistakes, and you all know I'm sorry, not commentator, the translator's many mistakes, and of course I am the translator, so I make plenty of mistakes, and I'll try to correct them. So here, Nidhanam, Ishvara is a treasure. The source of all that is valuable is what the term Nidhanam means. Also, Bijam Avyayam. Bijam, seed, and the term Avyayam has to be an adjective to Bijam. Avyaya means unchanging, eternal, immutable is a common translation. Imperishable, my translation, that's okay. That one I will accept. So notice when we've given, I just gave the example of seed becoming the tree. But when the seed becomes the tree, what happens to the seed? Even before the tree, it becomes a sprout. When that seed sprouts, what happens to the seed? Gone. The seed loses its existence when it becomes the sprout and later the tree. Here we're understanding Ishvara, the God of the cosmos, Saguna Brahman, to be the seed because of which the universe exists. But when the universe becomes manifest, that seed doesn't cease to exist. Ishvara remains unchanged. The seed undergoes change to become the sprout. Ishvara remains unchanged. And the metaphor we've given many times is that of your dream creation. When you create your dream world, what happens to you? You're still laying in bed very comfortably. Nothing happens to you. You remain as you are. That's the sense here. So just as you remain as you are when you create a dream creation, in the same way Ishvara remains unchanged when the universe becomes manifest. Okay, then. Tapam yahamaham varsham, tapam yahamaham nigriham yutsrajami cha, nigriham yutsrajami cha, amritam chaiva mrityuscha, amritam chaiva mrityuscha, sarasat chaham arjuna, sarasat. Good. Tapami aham. Here Sri Krishna uses that first person pronoun again. Aham, I. He speaks of himself as Ishvara, as Saguna Brahman. He says, aham tapami. I heat. You could loosely translate it as I cook, but that's not the context. I heat. I cause heat to occur, and aham varsham, I am the rains. This is a very common expression. I am the cause for heat, I am the cause for rains, I am the cause for the hot season, which right now in India, here we don't get it so much, but in India, its temperature is approaching 50 degrees C, 120 some degrees. So this is the hot season, but then the heat is followed by the varsham, rains. So Sri Krishna says here, I am the source of the heat, I am the source of the rains, means I am the source of the seasons, the constantly changing seasons. And he expands on that in the next line, nigrihami, I withdraw, utsrajami cha, and I send forth. Grih, to grasp. Nigrih, to pull back. I withdraw the heat, usually around August in India, and utsrajami, I send the rains forth. The monsoon is beginning in August. And you can apply this to anything. I withdraw one season, I send the next season forth. I withdraw the night, I send forth the day. I withdraw the day, I send forth the night. I withdraw the seed, I send forth the tree, the sprout. I withdraw your life, I send forth your next life. So the one who is the source of the endless cycle of creation is Ishvara. Amritam cha eva mrityuhu cha. So the last one, mrityuhu cha, I am death. Gosh, that sounds pretty grim. Amritaha cha, and immortality. So notice in my example, he withdraws your life, literally, he withdraws your life. When your prarabdha karma comes to an end, who is the karma paladata, the giver of the fruits of action, who brings your life to an end? Is Ishvara. So Ishvara is mrityuhu. In the famous Vedic hymn, Rudram, addressed to Lord Shiva, he says, I am mrityuhu, I am death. And here he says, Amritam cha, Sri Krishna says, I am not just death, I am immortality. You could loosely say, I'm not just death, I'm rebirth, the continued cycle of birth and death. Sadasat cha aham Arjuna. O Arjuna, I am sat and I am asat. Sat, real, asat, unreal, but needs to be interpreted. A very common interpretation. Sat is that which is manifest. Asat is that which is unmanifest. Sat is that which is other interpretation. Sat is that which is physical. Asat is that which is non-physical, sukshma. Like your brain is a physical reality, your mind is a non-physical reality. Your brain weighs several pounds. Your mind is not a physical reality. It has no weight. So we can take sat and asat in those terms as well. And in other ways, it basically wants to encompass everything. Everything is either sat or asat. Everything can be categorized in this twofold way. Everything that exists is a manifestation of Ishvara. And notice in this particular verse, it's talking about not just everything that exists, but everything that you experience. And this is a very crucial aspect of these teachings. We've seen it before, and we're seeing it here. And that is, everything you experience is a manifestation of Ishvara. One who says, the common argument against the existence of God is, have you ever seen God? Yeah, everyone wants to make that point. No one has seen God. Well, if you define God as an old man in heaven with a beard, or if you define God as a four-armed, blue-skinned man laying on a snake at the body of the Milky Ocean, no one has seen, no human being has seen that man with the white beard in heaven, that Lord Vishnu laying on his Ananta Shayana, his snake bed on the bottom of the Milky Ocean. No human being has seen. But that's not really who God is. Those are images of God, concepts of God, or even imaginations about God. God, better we should say Ishvara or Saguna Brahman, is all that exists. Everything being a manifestation of that Ishvara. Go back to your dream metaphor. Everything in your dream metaphor is a manifestation of you. That dream world exists within you, sustained by you, returns to you. So just as you are the reality because of which everything in your dream world exists, and one more step, take a character in your dream world. Let's take this. A character in your dream. A character in your dream who says, I don't think God exists. I don't think a creator of this world exists. A character in your dream says there is no creator. How does he know? He has a wrong conclusion. And the character in your dream argues, no one has ever seen the creator, which in a manner of speaking is true. In your dream, which character has seen you laying in your bed? No one. No character in your dream has seen you laying in your bed. So that dream character has said, who has seen? No one has seen. Yet, from another perspective, everything your dream character experiences is a manifestation of you, the dreamer. So even though that dream character cannot see you laying in bed, that was a transcendent aspect. Remember our discussion about transcendent and immanent? I won't go back to the board again. So we said there's an aspect which is beyond our experience, transcendent. So your dream character, and that's that transcendent aspect we call Nirguna Brahman. That transcendent aspect will never be experienced by your dream character, you laying in bed, but the immanent presence of you in and through your dream creation is constantly experienced by that character. In fact, everything your dream character experiences is you. So someone who says we can't see God is correct only to the extent that you say no one can experience Nirguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is not an object in the world available for experience. So from that standpoint, we can say no one, just like no dream character has seen you laying in your bed, we can say no one has seen that Nirguna Brahman. But just as every dream character experiences you, the dreamer, in everything they experience, in the same way, we can say everything you see around you, everything you experience throughout your life is nothing but Ishvara. Okay. Then, next topic. You saw the very dramatic... Oh. I hit the wrong button. I did. Okay, thank you. Good. You noticed how this verse changed meter. And and that's very dramatic, and it goes along with a shift of topic. So far we're talking about this Ishvara as being not one God, but only God, the reality because of which everything exists. Now the topic shifts to worship of that Ishvara. How shall we worship that Ishvara? Let's continue. Trividya mam soma pa puta papa. Trividya mam soma pa puta papa. Yajnarištva svargatim prartayante. Yajnarištva svargatim prartayante. Te punyamasadya surendra lokam. Te punyamasadya surendra lokam. Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan. Ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan. Trividya. We just mentioned 3 Vedas. So Trividya are those who worship according to the 3 Vedas. As I said before, all of the very traditional yajnas, the homas, havans that are performed, are based on scriptural instructions from the first 3 Vedas, not from the Atharva Veda. So, Trividyaha, those who worship according to the mandates of the 3 Vedas, which means those who perform those really complicated, elaborate yajnas that were performed in ancient times, still performed today, but to not so widely. And the yajnas we perform today are usually fairly short. In ancient times, they would perform yajnas that would go on for days. And one of the aspects of those yajnas that is not performed today, because we don't know anything about it, is a major offering. An ancient yajna means fire sacrifice. So and one ingredient, one element that was very important offering in these ancient yajnas, one important offering was soma. Now, what is soma? We don't even know for sure what soma is today, but from the Vedas themselves, we gather this much, that there was a plant, and they would press that plant, maybe in a mortar and pestle, and they would produce a juice. And that juice from the plant would then be offered into the fire. That juice is called soma. We're not sure what plant it is, and this particular offering is not done in modern times. It was done in ancient times. Certainly Sri Krishna says that those Trividyaha, those who worship according to the 3 Vedas, they are somapaha, they drink soma. And so the soma juice would not only be offered into the fire, some of it would be set aside and would be consumed. Having been offered, it's whatever remains is consumed. And by drinking this soma, the sanctified plant juice, plant essence, they become puta papaha. They become purified of their sins. Through the performance of this ritual, offering this soma juice, and second line, yajnaihi ishtva. Ishtva, by having offered that soma juice, yajnaihi, by means of this ritual, they ishtva, having worshipped, first line, mam, having worshipped me through that ritual. Now, bear in mind, when you're making offerings into that fire, we said before, it's not Agni that's necessarily being worshipped. Who is being worshipped depends on the mantras. So, for example, you could have a mantra, Om Vishnave Swaha, unto Vishnu, Vishnave. Om Rudraya Swaha, unto Rudra. Om Brahaspataye Swaha, unto Brahaspati. I think in our previous class we said that fire is the messenger, the priest, the one who transports your offerings to the deity. To the deity you worship. When I explained this with children once, I put it in a kind of a funny way, that fire is a messenger, and the mantras are like the address you write on an envelope. So your offerings are being taken by the fire messenger, but to whom you have to have an address. And the address, so to speak, is in the mantras you utter. You can, of course, utter the mantra Om Agnaye Swaha unto Agni. So unto all of these Vedic deities, these offerings were made. Of course, these Vedic rituals existed prior to Sri Krishna, right? Historically. All these Vedic rituals preceded Sri Krishna's historical existence. Therefore, do you think they ever said, Om Krishnaya Swaha? It's not there. Because Sri Krishna existed prior to to the rituals described in the three Vedas. But then he says, Mam Ishtva, they worshipped me. How can he say they worshipped me? He didn't even exist in that time. He didn't exist as Arjuna's charioteer. He didn't exist as an avatar as Lord Vishnu. He existed as Vishnu himself. He existed as Agni itself. He existed as Surya, as all the deities. We said this is the reality. Ishvara is the reality because of which everything exists. Sri Krishna here refers to himself as that Ishvara, as that Saguna Brahman. So he says, Mam Ishtva, having worshipped me, Yajnaihi, through these fire sacrifice rituals as specified in the three Vedas, through doing that, the worshippers, guided by the three Vedas, purified by drinking the soma juice. What about them? End of the second line, Prartayante Swargatim. Prartayante, they seek Swargatim, going to heaven. Excuse me, they seek heaven. How do they seek heaven? By performing these elaborate rituals, worshiping many deities, not just one, worshiping many forms of God. We'll talk about that later. They, through these rituals, gain much punya karma, good karmas. And that good karma will, at the end of this life, that good karma can fructify. If they have accumulated a sufficient amount of good karma, that karma can take them to Swarga. And that's what the second half says. Te, those worshippers, asadya, you have to look ahead. Punyam asadya. Asadya, having gained. Having gained what? Surendra lokam. The loka, the realm of Sura Indra, the king of the gods, heaven. So having reached the realm of Indra, having reached the realm of the gods, which is punyam, here punyam means sacred or blessed, holy. Having reached that holy realm that we call heaven or Swarga, then what? Ashnanti. In the last line, they enjoy. They enjoy what? Divyan Deva Bhogan. They enjoy Deva Bhogan, the pleasures of the gods. They become as though gods in a heaven, Divyan, and they enjoy these divine pleasures enjoyed by the gods. Where? Divi, in heaven. So having accumulated a sufficient amount of good karma through the performance of all these rituals, the force of that karma brings them to heaven at the end of this life. But, with a capital B, the punya that brings them to heaven, the good karma that brings them to heaven, is infinite in measure or finite in measure? Finite. It's a lot, takes a lot to get to heaven. It's still finite in measure. Therefore, their time in heaven will be infinite or finite. This is a basic teaching. And an example you may have heard me give long ago is if you collect several thousands of dollars, you can take a nice holiday in Hawaii. Or any place, so just take Hawaii. You go to Hawaii with many thousands of dollars and you get to enjoy a fancy resort, the nice beaches and the restaurants and all of that. So you enjoy all of that. But several thousands of dollars, eventually you'll burn through that money, and when your money is gone, you can't afford to stay on Hawaii anymore. You have to come back. It's a very appropriate metaphor to describe how you go to heaven based on finite religious merit, and when that finite religious merit has been exhausted. Notice we call the results of actions, we call fruits of actions. Even in English. In Sanskrit, phalam, karma phalam, phalam means fruit, and in English we call it fruits of action. Why do we call it fruits? Why don't we call it rocks or trees? We call it fruits. Why the fruits of action? Two reasons. One is fruits are produced from trees, etc. But a more important reason, fruits rot. You leave a banana laying there, it starts out green, a week later it's yellow, a week later it's black. Fruits rot. And that's significant. Karma phala is that which, not rot is not exactly the right word, we say it fructifies, it has to do its job, as it were, and it ends up being used up, finally speaking. That karma is used up just like your money is used up in Hawaii. In the same way, this punya, the good karma that brings you to heaven, it eventually gets used up. We use the term exhausted. Every time you have a pleasant experience, you exhaust some good karma. This is a little bit about the doctrine of karma, then we'll see the next verse. So we say that it is the fructification of karma that gives rise to your experience. Whenever you experience something pleasant, it's due to the fructification of good karma. And whenever you experience something unpleasant, that is a fructification of papa karma. And which means, by the way, there's a nice extension here. If you're going through a period of suffering, there's actually something good about it. And what's good about it is you are exhausting all of your bad karmas. So what it lies ahead for you is going to be better, because you're born with a finite amount of good karmas, a finite amount of bad karmas. So if you're exhausting all of the bad karmas, what lies ahead are relatively more good karmas. My guru used to say, every time a mosquito bites you, one papa karma is gone. So it's not, which means there is a silver lining to suffering, according to the law of karma. But the reverse is also true. There's a downside to pleasure. What is the downside to pleasure? You're in Hawaii, you're spending all your money. And the downside to pleasure here is you're exhausting all of your good karma. And when your good karma is exhausted, that life comes to an end. And your time in heaven comes to an end, and that's what's described in the next verse. Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam. Te tam bhuktva swargalokam vishalam. Kshine punye swargalok martyalokam vishanti. Kshine punye martyalokam vishanti. Evam trayi dharma manuprapanna. Evam trayi dharma manuprapanna. Gata gatam kama kama labhante. Gata gatam kama kama labhante. Te, those worshippers who performed the rituals according to the three Vedas, who drank the soma juice and were purified, who gathered a sufficient amount of good karma to go to heaven, what happened to them next? Te bhuktva, having enjoyed what? Swargalokam, heaven. Have enjoyed those heavenly enjoyments, vishalam, extensive heavenly enjoyments, or having enjoyed tam, that, swargalokam, that heaven, vishalam, for a long time, then kshine punye, when their punya, their good karma, is kshina, exhausted. When your money in Hawaii is spent, when your good karmas that took you to heaven have been exhausted, have been fructified, then what happens? Vishanti, they enter martyalokam, human world. They were in Swargalokam, a heavenly realm, but their life in heaven comes to an end when their good karma gets exhausted, and they get reborn, martyalokam, into this human world. And that's a best case scenario. Because I suppose there's all other lokas. There are 7 hells, after all. Also, you might be born into, how about Kita lokam? Kita means insect. You might be born not necessarily as a human being. We don't know. That's why I said Martyalokam is the best case scenario. Evam, thus Trayidharmam, according to the rituals in the three Vedas, which lead you to heaven, but also lead you to another life after going to heaven, those worshippers, anuprapannaha, they gain. What do they gain? No, actually, those worshippers who are, last line, kama kamaha, those worshippers who desire various pleasant things. They are kamins, actually, they are desirers of kama pleasure. Why? This is actually, I didn't make this point, very important. Why are those elaborate rituals done? Very significant. What is your purpose in a form of worship? There are various purposes that are done. And in the performance of these elaborate Vedic rituals, the purpose is actually established by a preliminary part of the ritual called sankalpa. Sankalpa is a part of the ritual in which you declare the purpose for which you're doing this ritual. Now, these two verses are referring to those who perform these elaborate rituals. They offered the soma juice, they drank the soma juice, they spent a lot of money hiring priests and doing rituals for days, and many rituals, not just one ritual for a few days, but many rituals lasting many, many days. Why? What prompted them? What was their goal as declared in their sankalpa? They wanted to go to heaven. Their goal was to go to heaven. Their goal in worshiping God is to go to heaven. Tell me, how spiritual does that sound? Their goal is to go to heaven. And in order to go to heaven, they have to pray to God. You know, it's like giving bakshish to someone, giving a bribe to someone so you can get what you want. Where is the spirituality in that? Where's the bhakti in that? If your worship and prayers are for the sake of going to heaven, that's not bhakti. That's bakshish. It's a bribe. And further, if your goal is something temporary, should you be surprised when it comes to an end, as happens for these worshipers? Now, in both of these ways, worship as understood from the standpoint of Vedanta is so different in both ways. First of all, worship is not from a Vedantic, when I say Vedantic standpoint, I'm talking about the standpoint of one who seeks moksha. Let's start there. They differ in two ways. This typical worship differs from our so-called Vedantic worship in two ways. Most significantly, the goals are different. The goal of these worshipers is to go to heaven. Why go to heaven? Why go to Hawaii? Pleasure. Plain and simple. Why go to heaven? Pleasure, plain and simple. This is the idea. So worship can be done for the sake of pleasure, but worship can be done for a more profound purpose. And in spiritual life, our purpose, ultimate purpose, we use the word moksha to describe this purpose. Do you remember our discussions about the 4 purusharthas, the 4 purposes of life or goals of life? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Just very quickly, let's reflect on that. So the first 3, kama, artha, and dharma. Kama, pleasure. Artha, wealth, so you can continue enjoying pleasure. Dharma, accumulation of good karma, so you can enjoy pleasure in heaven. So kama, pleasure. Dharma, artha, pleasure. Dharma, pleasure. They're all pleasure-seeking. As opposed to the 4th, moksha, which most specifically is not pleasure-seeking. Why? Pleasures are temporary. Any experience is temporary. There's no such thing as a permanent experience. If you seek an experience, even if you seek a spiritual experience, you're seeking something temporary. Look at that. Seeking heaven is seeking a temporary experience. How about someone who seeks samadhi? A spiritual experience of bliss, an ecstatic spiritual experience. How long does that samadhi last? Minutes? Any experience is time-bound, finite, temporary, and comes to an end. The pleasure, all 3, so kama, the pleasure you get eating ice cream, my example, is temporary. Artha, the pleasure you get in the future from accumulated wealth, is finite. Dharma, the pleasure you get in heaven, is finite. It comes to an end. All experiences, including spiritual experiences, are finite. Therefore, if what you want is something more, Sri Krishna used the word amritam, immortality. If you want something that's not finite, that's not time-bound, the goal is not reached through seeking artha, kama, artha, and dharma. The goal is reaching moksha, pursuing moksha. Moksha, as you know, literally means liberation, freedom, and specifically freedom in 2 ways. Freedom from suffering now, and freedom from suffering in future lives later. Freedom from suffering now, freedom from suffering later, or in a positive sense, being peaceful and content now, being peaceful and content in future. Being peaceful and content while you're alive, being peaceful and content after this life is done. How is that reached? Not by seeking pleasure. It is sought by seeking moksha, and that's what all of Vedanta is about, is to gain moksha. Now, coming back to this worship, why is a form of ritual performed? Why does someone pray? Why does someone worship? Well, depends on which of those 4 you're seeking. And in general, you know the rule of life. You get what you work for. Usually, to some extent. You don't get fully what you want. But if you work for pleasure, you get some pleasure. If you work for artha, wealth, you get some artha. And if you work hard for going to heaven, maybe you can go to heaven, but that's all you get. Suppose you decide, I don't want mere pleasure, I want moksha. In a general sense, I want spiritual growth leading to enlightenment. If that's your ultimate goal, what will you pray for? Not pleasure. Hey Bhagavan, bless me with the ability to gain spiritual growth. If you're doing a ritual, if you're doing one of these elaborate Vedic rituals, what will be your sankalpa? At the beginning you've seen a priest or someone performing a ritual. There's a particular way you hold your hands, and there's a particular mantra that's recited, Mamo Pata Samasta Duridikshaya, etc., etc. Sometimes it goes on in a very elaborate way. In that sankalpa, you declare your intent. And if your intent, as declared, is pleasure, either pleasure in worldly life, pleasure later in this life, or pleasurable experiences in heaven, if that is your sankalpa, that's all you're going to get. On the other hand, suppose your sankalpa is for spiritual growth. And the way it works is that by invoking God's grace, by invoking good karma, that good karma has the effect of counteracting bad karma. In spiritual life, we encounter many obstacles to spiritual growth. When you sit down to meditate, if your mind is agitated, that's an obstacle to spiritual growth. If you're very extrovert and seeking pleasures in the world, those are obstacles to spiritual growth. How to remove those obstacles to spiritual growth? Well, prayer and rituals have a very important role in removing those obstacles. Now, I'll conclude here with a very important point, and that is prayers and rituals in and of themselves won't lead you to moksha, enlightenment. But those prayers and rituals will help you overcome obstacles to enlightenment. There are plenty of obstacles to enlightenment, so we could say without a doubt, without prayer and some form of worship, it's unlikely that you'll overcome those obstacles. But with prayer and some form of worship, by the way, forms of worship is our next topic, we'll see in our next class. With prayer and some kind of form of worship, any form of worship, you can invoke grace. You can invoke good, you can accumulate good karmas that help you overcome obstacles so that you can finally reach moksha, reach the state of being freed from suffering now and later, reach a state of perfect peace, perfect contentment, which you enjoy in this lifetime. And after this lifetime is over, you never again are subjected to suffering. So look at the role here of prayer and meditation. And just to loop back a little bit, look at the problem in the fact that so much prayer and worship are done for the sake of pleasure, here and later. And I've joked with you before, there's one author, actually Buddhist author, who aptly coined the term that best describes this. To use prayer and other spiritual practices for the sake of gaining pleasure, this author coined the term spiritual materialism. Perfect. It is. You're using spiritual techniques for materialistic goals. And we need to understand the flaws of that spiritual materialism so that at the time of prayer, doing any kind of spiritual practice, doing any kind of worship, that we know very clearly what our goal is. Our goal cannot be merely pleasure. Those pleasures will come and go. Our goal, however, can be much higher than that. Our goal can be moksha, perfect peace, contentment, enlightenment. And that's a good place to wrap up our class for today. We'll continue this topic in our next class, and we'll conclude today with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Uttabasira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.